The sandstorm had passed 3 hours ago, leaving the Crimson Barrens looking like a different world. Natasha Brooks gripped the steering wheel of her cargo hauler, squinting through the dusty windshield at the endless expanse of red dunes. She had been running supplies between human settlements for 2 years now, ever since she left her engineering job on Earth. Out here, nobody asked questions about your past. Nobody cared why you chose solitude over society. Her radio crackled with interference. The settlements were too far apart for clear communication in this dead zone. Natasha reached for her water bottle and took a long drink, feeling the liquid cool her parched throat. The temperature gauge on her dashboard read 42 degrees outside. Another scorching day in paradise. She was thinking about her route when she heard it. A sound that cut through the engine noise like a knife. It was faint at first, almost lost in the rumble of machinery. But as she slowed down to navigate around a rocky outcrop, she heard it again. Crying. Not human crying, but something else. Something desperate and afraid. Natasha killed the engine and climbed out of the cab. The heat slammed into her like a physical force. She pulled her wide-brimmed hat lower and listened. There it was again, coming from behind a formation of twisted stone pillars that jutted from the sand like ancient fingers reaching toward the sky. Her boots crunched across the hard pack as she walked toward the sound. Part of her mind screamed that this was foolish. The Barrens were home to plenty of dangerous creatures. Sand vipers, scorpion beetles, worse things that came out at night. But the crying pulled at something deep in her chest. She had heard sounds like that before, in field hospitals during her brief volunteer stint after the colony wars. The sound of something in pain, something that needed help. Behind the largest pillar, partially buried in drifted sand, she found it. The dragon hatchling was smaller than she expected. Its body was roughly the size of a house cat, covered in delicate scales that gleamed pure white in the harsh sunlight. Unlike the deep crimson or emerald green of healthy draconi young, this creature was colorless. Albino. Its small wings were folded against its sides, the membranes nearly transparent. Its eyes, when they opened, were the palest shade of violet she had ever seen. Natasha dropped to her knees beside the creature. She had seen draconi before, the proud reptilian species that shared this planet with human colonists. They were intelligent, honorable, and fiercely traditional. She also knew what white scales meant to them. Cursed. Demon-touched. To be abandoned at birth. The hatchling's breathing came in shallow gasps. Its scales were cracked and peeling from sun exposure. Dehydration had sunken its eyes into their sockets. Red sand caked its nostrils and mouth. This little one had been left here to die, probably days ago. The fact that it still lived spoke to a terrible strength of will. The creature looked at her, and Natasha felt her heart clench. Those violet eyes held intelligence, awareness, and something else. Recognition that here, finally, was someone who might help. A tiny clawed hand lifted from the sand, trembling with effort, reaching toward her. Natasha made her decision in a heartbeat. She pulled off her work jacket and wrapped the hatchling carefully, lifting it as gently as she could. The creature was burning hot despite being cold-blooded. Fever, maybe, or just the brutal effect of the sun on unprotected skin. It whimpered softly as she stood, but didn't struggle. Back at the hauler, she cranked the climate control to maximum cool and laid the hatchling on the passenger seat. Her emergency kit yielded a clean dropper and medical-grade water. The hatchling was too weak to drink on its own. Natasha squeezed drops carefully between its lips, massaging its throat to help it swallow. At first, nothing happened. Then the little creature's throat moved, and it swallowed. Relief flooded through her. She gave it more water, slowly, watching for any sign of distress. After several minutes, the frantic edge left the hatchling's breathing. Its body relaxed slightly in the makeshift nest she created from her spare blankets. Those violet eyes never left her face. Natasha sat back and ran a hand through her sweat-dampened hair. What had she just done? Draconai law was clear. White-scaled hatchlings were sacred sacrifices, left in the desert as offerings to the old gods. Taking one was theft. Interfering with religious practice. She could be arrested, imprisoned, or worse. The Draconai took their traditions seriously. But looking at the tiny creature breathing softly in her blankets, she couldn't bring herself to care about laws or traditions. This was a living being. A child, essentially. And it had been thrown away like garbage because of something it couldn't control. The hatchling made a small sound, softer now, less desperate. Natasha reached out carefully and stroked one finger along its head, avoiding the sensitive areas around its horns. The creature leaned into her touch, eyes closing briefly. Something warm unfurled in Natasha's chest. She had been alone by choice for so long. Maybe too long. She pulled out her NAV computer and checked her route. Cornerstone Settlement was still 4 days away. Beyond that, the human outpost of Haven's End would take another 3. She had supplies for herself, but nothing suitable for a hatchling. She would need to improvise. From her food stores, she found a package of dried meat strips. She broke off a tiny piece and held it near the hatchling's mouth. The creature sniffed it cautiously, then took it between small, sharp teeth. It chewed slowly, thoughtfully, then swallowed. Its eyes brightened slightly. "Good," Natasha said softly. "We will figure this out together, little one." She restarted the engine and pulled back onto the desert track, adjusting her mirrors to keep an eye on her passenger. The hatchling watched her with those unervingly intelligent eyes. Natasha found herself talking to fill the silence. "You need a name," she said. "Can't just keep calling you hatchling." She thought for a moment, looking at those pure white scales. "How about Frost?" "Simple, fits you perfectly." The creature made a small chirping sound. Natasha took that as approval. As the hauler rumbled across the wasteland, Natasha's mind worked through problems and possibilities. She was harboring what the Draconai considered stolen property. She could lose her contract, her livelihood, possibly her freedom. But when she glanced over at Frost, now sleeping peacefully in the blanket nest, she knew she had made the right choice. 4 days to Cornerstone. 4 days to figure out what came next. 4 days before she had to decide whether to hide Frost or fight for the little dragon's right to live. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. Frost stirred, those violet eyes opening to watch the colors play across the windshield. The hatchling made a soft, wondering sound. Natasha smiled despite everything. Whatever happened next, at least Frost would see one more sunset. That was worth something. That was worth everything. The hauler drove on into the gathering dusk, carrying cargo, a woman running fro. The first full day with Frost brought revelations Natasha had not expected. The hatchling recovered with astonishing speed. By morning, Frost could stand on shaky legs, chirping insistently until Natasha woke and provided breakfast. The little dragon devoured 3 times the amount of food from the previous day, then promptly fell asleep in a patch of sunlight streaming through the windshield. Natasha took advantage of the quiet to inspect her cargo and check the hauler's systems. Everything looked good. The solar panels were charging the backup batteries. The water recycler was functioning. They had enough supplies to reach Cornerstone, though she would need to ration carefully with 2 mouths to feed instead of 1. When she returned to the cab, Frost was awake and crying. The moment the hatchling saw her, the crying stopped. Relief flooded those violet eyes. Frost scrambled across the seat toward her, nearly tumbling off in the process. Natasha caught the little dragon and lifted it carefully. "Easy there," she said, settling back into the driver's seat with Frost in her lap. "I was only gone 10 minutes. Frost chirped and pressed against her, tiny claws gripping her shirt. The hatchling's heart was racing. Natasha realized with a start that Frost was terrified of being left alone again. Of course. The little one had been abandoned once already, left to die in the desert. The trauma ran deep. She stroked Frost's head gently, feeling the delicate scales under her fingers. "I am not going anywhere," she promised. "You are stuck with me now." The hatchling seemed to understand. Its heartbeat slowed, and it relaxed against her. Natasha started the engine and pulled back onto the route, driving one-handed while Frost dozed in her lap. It was awkward, but she managed. By midday, Frost was mobile enough to explore the cab. The hatchling investigated everything with intense curiosity. The dashboard buttons. The gear shift. The emergency supply boxes. Frost's intelligence became more apparent with each passing hour. When Natasha explained that certain switches were dangerous, Frost stopped touching them. When she showed the hatchling where the water dispenser was, Frost learned to activate it independently. "You understand me, don't you?" Natasha asked during lunch. She was eating a protein bar while Frost munched on dried meat. Not just sounds, but actual words. Frost looked at her and chirped twice, a sound that somehow conveyed affirmation. Then the hatchling tilted its head and made a different sound, questioning. Natasha laughed. "Are you asking if I understand you?" "Fair question. I am learning." They developed a rhythm over the next 2 days. Mornings began with breakfast and systems checks, Frost perched on her shoulder like an exotic pet. Days were spent driving through the endless desert, Natasha talking about her life while Frost listened with obvious interest. Evenings meant stopping at safe spots, sharing dinner, and watching the spectacular sunsets together. Frost grew stronger each day. The hatchling's scales brightened, taking on a lustrous pearl sheen. The cracking from sun damage healed. Frost started attempting to fly, spreading those translucent wings and flapping enthusiastically before tumbling back down. Natasha caught the little dragon every time, laughing at the determined expression on Frost's face. But on the 4th day, their peaceful journey was interrupted. The radio, silent for days, suddenly crackled to life with multiple voices. Natasha turned up the volume and listened carefully. Settlement chatter mostly. Weather reports. Trading discussions. Then a Draconai voice cut through, speaking in accented but clear human language. "Attention all travelers in the Crimson Barrens sector. The Serpent Clan seeks information about stolen sacred property. A white-scaled hatchling, taken from the offering grounds 4 days ago. Reward offered for information leading to recovery. Theft of sacred offerings is a grave offense." Natasha's hands tightened on the wheel. Frost, sensing her tension, climbed into her lap and looked up at her with worried eyes. "Sacred property," Natasha muttered bitterly. "You are not property. You are a person." The broadcast repeated twice more, then faded into static. Natasha turned down the volume and focused on driving. Her mind raced through possibilities. The Draconai were serious about their traditions. The Serpent Clan was one of the largest and most influential. If they were actively searching, this could become very dangerous very quickly. She could turn Frost over. Claim she found the hatchling and was bringing it back. She might even get the reward. But the thought of returning Frost to die in the desert made her stomach turn. The little dragon trusted her completely now. Curled up in her lap, making soft contented sounds, Frost had no idea of the danger. Natasha made her decision. She would not give Frost up. Not to tradition, not to law, not to anyone. If that made her a criminal, so be it. Some things mattered more than staying out of trouble. Cornerstone Settlement appeared on the horizon late that afternoon. It was a typical frontier town, prefabricated buildings arranged in a rough grid, surrounded by defensive walls. Mining equipment dotted the landscape. Natasha could see humans, Draconai, and a few other species moving through the streets. She parked at the cargo depot and looked at Frost seriously. "I need you to hide," she said. "Just for a little while. There are Drakenei here, and if they see you, we will both be in danger." Frost chirped unhappily but allowed Natasha to settle the hatchling in a hidden compartment beneath the passenger seat. She left the panel slightly ajar for air and placed her jacket over the opening. "I will be back soon," she promised. 30 minutes, maybe less. Inside the depot, she filed her delivery paperwork quickly and efficiently. The human clerk barely looked up from his terminal. "Need anything while you are here?" he asked. "Just refueling and resupply," Natasha said. "I am headed to Haven's End after this. Long haul. Watch yourself out there. Heard the Serpent clan is stirring up trouble about something." Natasha kept her expression neutral. "I will be careful." She collected her payment and headed to the supply store. She needed food that would work better for a growing dragon. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, helped her find high-protein supplements and mineral additives. "Got a pet?" the woman asked curiously, eyeing the unusual selection. "Something like that," Natasha said vaguely. On her way back to the hauler, she passed a group of Drakenei warriors. They were impressive beings, tall and powerful, with scales in deep shades of crimson and bronze. Their conversation was in their own language, but the tone was serious. "Searching." Natasha kept walking, forcing herself not to hurry. She reached her hauler, climbed into the cab, and immediately opened the hidden compartment. Frost looked up at her, eyes bright with relief. "Good job staying quiet," Natasha said, lifting the hatchling out. Frost climbed onto her shoulder and nuzzled against her neck. She refueled quickly and pulled out of Cornerstone before full dark. The settlement lights faded behind them as they headed deeper into the barrens. Frost chirped questioningly. "We are going somewhere safer," Natasha said. "Haven's End is a human settlement. No Drakenei. We will have time to figure things out there. 3 days to Haven's End. 3 days to stay ahead of searchers. 3 days before they could breathe easily again." Natasha drove into the night, Frost curled in her lap, both of them heading toward an uncertain sanctuary. Haven's End lived up to its name. The settlement sat at the very edge of explored territory, where the Crimson Barrens gave way to the Grey Wastes. It was smaller than Cornerstone, but more fortified. Humans had built it as a research outpost years ago, and it had grown into a proper town. Most importantly, it was almost entirely human, with only a handful of other species passing through. Natasha arrived at dawn on the 7th day. Frost had grown noticeably larger during the journey. The hatchling now stood as tall as a medium-sized dog, with wings that could almost lift its body weight. Those violet eyes sparkled with intelligence that seemed to grow sharper each day. She rented a small apartment on the edge of town, paying cash for a month in advance. The landlord, a grizzled man named Thomas Beck, barely glanced at her identification. "Keep to yourself, pay on time, we will get along fine," he said, handing over the keys. The apartment was basic but clean. One main room with a kitchenette, a small bedroom, and a bathroom. Frost explored everything immediately, chirping with excitement at having real space to move around in. The hatchling found the bedroom closet particularly interesting, dragging blankets in to create a nest. Natasha collapsed on the couch and closed her eyes. 7 days of constant vigilance had exhausted her. But they had made it. They were safe, at least for now. Over the next 2 weeks, Natasha established a routine. She took small cargo jobs around Haven's End, nothing that would require leaving Frost alone for long. The hatchling stayed in the apartment during the day, amusing itself by arranging and rearranging its blanket nest, playing with the few toys Natasha had fashioned from rope and spare parts. But Frost's intelligence was becoming impossible to ignore. The hatchling understood complex instructions. It could open doors, work simple latches, and seemed to comprehend human speech almost completely. At night, when Natasha read books aloud, Frost would listen with rapt attention, occasionally making sounds that seemed like attempts at mimicking words. "You are going to start talking soon, aren't you?" Natasha said one evening. Frost chirped and tilted its head, then opened its mouth and made a sound that was almost human. "Nah," the hatchling managed. Natasha sat bolt upright. "Did you just try to say my name?" Frost looked pleased with itself and tried again. "Nasha." Tears pricked Natasha's eyes. She pulled the growing dragon into a hug, feeling Frost's wings wrap around her in return. "You brilliant little thing," she whispered. But their peace could not last forever. 3 weeks after arriving at Haven's End, Natasha was at the market when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two travelers were discussing news from Cornerstone. The Serpent clan had expanded their search. They were offering a substantial reward now. More than that, they had declared that anyone harboring the white hatchling would be considered an enemy of the Draconai people. The political implications were serious. Humans and Draconai had a fragile peace. One woman hiding one hatchling could potentially threaten that balance. Natasha hurried home, her mind racing. When she entered the apartment, Frost looked up from the book the hatchling had been studying. Yes, studying. Frost had figured out how to turn pages and had been looking at picture books for hours. "We need to talk," Natasha said. She sat down and explained everything. The Draconai traditions about white-scaled hatchlings. The search. The potential political consequences. Frost listened carefully, those violet eyes growing more serious as the explanation continued. When Natasha finished, Frost was quiet for a long moment. Then the hatchling spoke, words still halting but clear enough. "They want Frost dead?" Natasha nodded, throat tight. Frost stood and walked to the window, looking out at the settlement. "Why?" "Because you are different. Because their traditions say white scales are cursed. But Frost, not cursed. Frost is Frost. I know, sweetheart. I know." The young dragon turned to face her. "Natasha, sorry. Make trouble?" "No." Natasha stood and went to Frost, kneeling to be at eye level. "You are not trouble. You are my friend. My family. I chose to save you, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Frost's eyes glistened. The hatchling had learned to cry, Natasha realized. Not from pain or fear, but from emotion. Frost pressed against her, and they held each other in the fading light. That night, Natasha made plans. They could not stay at Haven's End indefinitely. Eventually, word would spread. The Serpent clan would find them. She needed a more permanent solution. The answer came from an unexpected source. Thomas Beck, her landlord, knocked on her door 3 days later. When she opened it cautiously, he was holding a large package. "This came for you," he said. Then, more quietly, "I also heard some travelers asking about a woman and a white dragon. Thought you should know." Natasha's heart sank. "How long do we have?" "Maybe a day. Maybe less." He handed her the package. "I don't know your story, and I don't need to. But I served in the colony wars. I know what it looks like when someone's fighting for something that matters. There's a supply ship leaving for the Northern Territories tomorrow morning. Captain owes me a favor. She will take passengers who need to disappear. Why are you helping us?" Thomas smiled sadly. "Because a long time ago, someone helped me when I needed to disappear. Pay it forward, yeah?" Natasha took the package with shaking hands. "Thank you." They packed that night. Everything essential fit into 2 bags. Frost helped, moving with purpose and understanding. The young dragon had grown so much in just a month. Nearly the size of a large dog now, with wings strong enough for short flights. As they prepared to leave, Frost spoke again, words coming more easily now. "Where we go?" "North," Natasha said. "To the mountains. I heard there are valleys there where no one goes. We can build something. A real home. Together? Together." Frost spread its wings, white membranes catching the lamplight. "Frost can fly now. Can help. I know you can." They left Haven's End before dawn, meeting the supply ship at the edge of town. The captain, a weathered woman named Rivera, looked at Frost with raised eyebrows but said nothing. She simply gestured them aboard. As the ship lifted into the early morning sky, Natasha looked back at Haven's End one last time. Then she looked forward, toward the distant mountains barely visible on the horizon. Frost stood beside her at the viewing port, wings folded, eyes bright with anticipation. "New home," the young dragon said. "New start," Natasha agreed. Whatever came next, they would face it together. A woman who had chosen compassion over law, and a dragon who had been thrown away by tradition but had found something more valuable than acceptance from those who rejected it. They had found each other. The ship flew north, carrying them toward mountains, mystery, and a future they would build with their own hands and wings.